So let's talk about keeping your game alive. Let's talk remasters and remakes. To start with, actually, this dichotomy is incomplete because we can actually go further to the left of remaster and go all the way back to re-release. So a re-release is when you just take a game and put it back out on a new platform, changing nothing at all. You see this, Nintendo does this fairly often where they just take one of their 16-bit era games and they re-release it in a bundle or a package. But pretty quickly, as you move down this line, you realize that actually a lot of times you can't just re-release a game because maybe the aspect ratio has changed or the controller is different on the current thing you're releasing it on. So you have to do some amount of work to make it go. Even if you just wrap the thing with a frame to get the aspect ratio right, you've moved past a pure re-release into doing some additional work. Do you add on all of the patches that were created for the thing that you're re-releasing? Do you do a little bit more than that and start to fix a few new things? Maybe the game was created in an era of 16-bit memory. Do you re-release a 64-bit version? So as you go down this road, you're getting closer and closer to a remaster. Now, a remaster comes from film where the idea is that you actually start from the original source material and put it together in a different way to make a new master. It usually doesn't involve new footage being created. In the case of games, this is rarely the case. It might be because maybe you authored your textures at a higher resolution. Maybe your models were all created with hundreds of thousands of polygons, and you're able to go back to the original source and remaster and create a new version of the game out of the same source material without having to create anything new. But in most cases, you are going to have to create new assets in order for the thing to look good and qualify for what most people imagine a remaster looks like. So new textures, new models, potentially re-rendering your cutscenes. Sometimes that is done procedurally with AI, and with mixed results, because if you had a clever little visual gag in your texture, when the AI comes in and uprises it from a 256 by 256 texture to a 4K texture, that visual gag might end up getting lost because the AI doesn't understand what it's looking at. You certainly see that some of this procedural uprising has a bit of a hit or miss effect. So you're probably going to want to go in and hand touch some of this stuff as well. But as long as you're in there, now you have a bit of a dilemma because you have the opportunity to change other things. If your balance was a little too easy or a little too hard or inconsistent, do you go in and change that to make it more in line with what people expect these days? Or maybe you had that slightly misogynistic camera shot of someone's butt in the original version of the game. Do you take that out as long as you have things open? When you're in remaster territory, the player expectation isn't necessarily that you address these things, but that expectation is constantly evolving and changing. As you continue down this road and you change more and more and more, it's a bit of a ship of Theseus. At some point, is it still the same game? At what point do you cross from remaster into something that's much more akin to a remake? Now, a remake, usually you would expect it to be started from scratch, but actually that's probably very rarely actually the case. You're probably pulling something forward into your remake, even if that game is from a long time ago. You're probably pulling forward text or story or something. So even a remake is a very extreme remaster. But this spectrum is actually incomplete because we can start pushing past remake into reimagining the game itself. So an extreme example of this would be the Final Fantasy VII that Square recently released, where it's not actually a remake or a remaster of Final Fantasy VII at all. It's a reimagining of what the game could be. And as you cross from remaster into remake, now player expectation changes, and they're starting to expect you to start to address some of these things that maybe haven't aged so well. Some of those bits of story or theme that were okay 15 years ago that aren't so okay anymore, or bits of gameplay, and the gameplay expectations have moved on. Maybe you used to have player-centric movement, but now the expectation from pretty much the universe is you have camera-centric movement. So you probably have to go back in there and change that. But of course, as soon as you do that, you're going to have some people that were true hardcore die-in-the-wool fans of the original that are going to feel like you've damaged something in the process of changing things. And sometimes that's actually the case. If you look at something like Silent Hill, their remaster, their remake, they pushed the fog boundaries way back because the technology allowed them to do so. But of course, Silent Hill is kind of all about the claustrophobic fog cloud. So by doing something they could do, they undermined the sense and theme and feeling of the game. At some point along this final branch of the spectrum, you're basically moving from redoing the game into, it's just a sequel with a different label. You've stopped remastering or reimagining, and you're really just doing a reboot. You're just making a brand new game. The game called God of War that came out more recently than the original God of War, that's not a re-release or a remaster or a remake or even really a reimagining. That's a reboot. That is something, yet again, that is taking the franchise in a new direction and sort of exists on top or beyond the original game. So what do you do? Where do you stop on this spectrum? Where do you stop on the line? If you stick way down at the re-release side, the expectations are pretty low. You can just basically make it go and you're good to go. As you cross into remaster, now you're getting more expectations coming in from the audience in terms of visual fidelity and audio fidelity and addressing bugs. And as you get further and further into remake and reimagining territory, you're going to have an expectation that you start to address bigger, broader, more thematic issues around theme and storytelling and gameplay. You really need to decide how far you want to take it. Typically, for a game that's very, very old, you kind of only have two choices. You re-release it or you remake it. Remaster, you're probably not going to be able to pull it off. Whereas if it's something in the middle of age, you might be able to do a remaster, avoid the need to open up everything and address every single thing, but still get the fidelity up high enough. If you look at something like the Mass Effect Legendary Edition, that is more a remaster than a remake. But they do some remake style work. They do address some of the more egregious cinematic framing. They do change some things a little bit. If you were to do Dragon Age Origins, it's hard to imagine being able to get the fidelity high enough in a remaster territory. But if you push it into remake, then you are adding a lot of additional things you have to consider onto the plate. So it would be very tempting to try to stay in remaster territory if you can at all, because it's going to allow the thing to be done at a more reasonable price point. Otherwise, it probably doesn't happen at all, unless you find a very clever way to make it get done. It's a spectrum. There are things that exist all on this line. All of them can be good things that continue to allow people to play your game. Special thanks to my members. They provide the resources that this channel needs to keep running. If you found this video interesting, give it a thumbs up, because that tells YouTube that it's worth spreading around. If you're interested in becoming a member, there's a link to that in the description. And if you want to pick up some merch, I'm wearing the 2DA Forever, arguably my most niche t-shirt. There is a shelf below this video. What are some remakes and remasters you've played and enjoyed more than the original game? Do you think that games have the responsibility to update themselves over time, or should they be allowed to fade into the background? And if they're updating themselves, how far do they need to take it? Throw a comment down below and let's talk about it. I'll see you again soon. Thank you.